Welcome to the G5 Hive and the next installment of our Worker Bee series, where we deep dive into the G5 college football landscape with the folks that know the teams the best. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're listening in podcast form, please rate and review. Today, we'll be talking some independent football and taking a look at the UConn Huskies, who finished 9-4 last season and capped it off with a win in the Wasabi Bowl, their first bowl win since 2009. No spring game for the Huskies, but they wrapped up their 2025 spring practice, the final practice on April 16th, with a special guest joining us today. He is the best source for UConn athletic news. He is the football guy at Store Central. He is Graham Chamberlain. Graham can be found on X at PausARF blog. Welcome to the show, Graham.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Well, for folks that might be tuning in for the first time and didn't join us last year, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how long you've been covering UConn football?
Yeah, been a fan my whole life growing up, ever since they were back in the 1AA days, playing in the Atlantic 10, playing New Hampshire, playing Maine, playing all of them. Started doing this in like 2017 or so, just picked up a WordPress blog and a then Twitter account. People in my life are like, love you, but you got to stop talking to us about UConn football so often. So I figured, I might as well channel this into something else, So did that for a few years, worked for the Rivals UConn page for another couple of years. And then this Store Central site started up in March of last year in 2024. They asked me to come aboard. Had to say yes, any opportunity to help our student athletes, with NIL or opportunities or anything else. If this is the little thing I can do to help, then yes, I'm in. So that's it. That's my story.
Well, let's move over to some UConn football talk, and we'll start with the offense. For those not familiar with the Huskies' offensive style, how would you describe it?
Oh, it's very run heavy, very run first. And that's, even going back to the Big East days, they were always a run first team. It's just what works best here, apparently. And I think part of that is, the recruiting challenges that UConn has, not necessarily having enough talent in the region to kind of build your own roster. You kind of have to find some diamonds in the rough. You got to find some big, tough offensive linemen, and running backs are a little easier to find recruiting wise too. So it all kind of works out. But I would say they've been getting more into the passing game in the past couple of years, especially under Jim Mora. And it's certainly more of an emphasis. They're not the, run the ball 65, 75% of the time like it used to be back in the Randy Edsall days in the original Big East. But with that said, they will still run the ball first every time.
Well, let's get to the position where it all starts on offense. That's the quarterback. Last season when we spoke, UConn was on search for answers at quarterback. Joseph Wignano won the job over Wisconsin transfer Nick Evers. However, by week 3, Nick was starting. Nick got banged up a few times throughout the season in the Buffalo and UAB games, which gave Wignano other opportunities to start. Both Nick and Joe are back for the 2025 season. And so what should we make of this quarterback room as we head into fall camp?
Yeah, actually, to correct you a little bit, it was actually Nick Evers that won the job coming out of camp. He started the Maryland game.
Okay.
Got dinged up. Joe came on second half. Did all right, but, it's already like 30-0 at that point. It's not like it made a huge difference. Joe played in the Merrimack game the second week of the season. And as you should, against a team like Merrimack, just, threw for 300 yards, faced very little resistance. But like you said, it was back and forth all year. The thing last year was the assumption was that Joe was not coming back, right?
Yeah.
So you go out, you got Nick Evers, you hope he's your quarterback of the, that year and going forward. His thing was he didn't really have reps. He hadn't played really in game action at Oklahoma or at Wisconsin where he was prior. So the idea was, put him in and let him get that experience and see what happens. And it didn't it didn't happen for him. He struggled mightily when he was in. And Joe would come in when Nick would get dinged up and just be a calming, veteran leader, which is amazing to have off the bench. Like, I think there's a lot of teams that probably wish they had a Joe Fagnano coming off the bench like that. And season ends, all of a sudden there's some talk like, oh, actually he might get another year, which is interesting because I was saying you play Nick because Joe's not coming back, so it's like you need to let him hopefully work out whatever kinks he's got in his game. But if I knew Joe was coming back, I'd say leave him in, right? I mean, maybe they win another game last year. Maybe they get to 10-3 instead of 9-4. But it's gonna be the two of them again competing. I don't think it's much of a competition. I think it's Joe Fagnano's team.
Yeah.
And really it's the first time in a while that they've actually had like a quarterback. I mean, I know Joe didn't start the whole year, but he started a bunch and actually come back and start the next year. It's been a position that they've really struggled to find answers at for years, and especially to find continuity at that position. So it'll be huge to have Joe back again. It's good to have another guy like Nick Evers, who at least has experience out there. He's not gonna be scared, or the moment's too big for him. Still needs to perform, of course, but you at least need that leadership out there. So the room itself is, it's pretty good. I know that everybody looks good in practice, like in the spring. The freshmen they had coming in, I thought looked pretty good, a little undersized, which is classic UConn. But he had good stuff, and just it's probably the best they've been at the position maybe mid 2010s, back when they had Brian Harris in the AAC days. I mean, it's probably the best that they've had.
Yeah, I thought Joe really played well last year. From an outsider's perspective, he definitely looked like he outplayed Nick in the opportunities he had. Just
easily
more poised. He just looked like a real leader out there. And I guess you would expect that given all his age and experience. But for those not familiar with Fagnano's game, how would you describe it?
Certainly more of a pocket passer. He can run. I tell people all the time, like, don't sleep on him. He can scoop. He's not going to do it. He's smart about it, right? Which I think is something different than Nick's game. I think that Nick takes off, doesn't let everything develop fully, and it's kind of like once it starts to break down, he goes. I think Joe's a little better at making all of his checks, and then if he has to go, he'll go. But he's no like Tom Brady out there. It's just slow-footed. Like, he can move, but he's largely accurate. Has his moments where he's not, just like everybody else. But he stands in. He throws a good ball. A nice accurate ball, and most importantly, and it sounds silly to say, but UConn hasn't had this in a long time. He hits guys who are open and puts the ball where it needs to be. And like, it sounds like, okay, obviously, Graham, but it's like, we've had plenty of quarterbacks where dudes are wide open and they can't hit them, right? So Joe does it. The receivers do their job. And, he had some other plays last year where, he throws a really, nice deep ball to someone like Shamar Porter. Porter makes a nice catch. Like, he just puts the ball in areas where receivers can make a play. And what more can you really ask for from a quarterback?
Yeah, that's all you need, right? I mean,
right. I mean, the differences were stark, when you go, it's all relative, right? Because, you watch the Syracuse game last year and you see Kyle McCord do his thing against UConn, right? And, they both kind of be considered like pocket passers, and it's all relative. But for UConn's talent level, for their schedule, Joe's the fantastic option. Just really, like I said, strong, accurate, great leadership, just keeps everything calm out there. Cool, calm, collected. And that's Joe Fagnano.
Well, let's move over to the running game. And this last season, the staff utilized a 3-back rotation. Darrell Robinson is now off to Auburn, but this room returns the other two in Cam Edwards and Mel Brown. Victor Rosa battled injuries all season. He also returns in 2025. And they also added MJ Flowers from Eastern Illinois. Should we expect another, 3-back or heavy rotation here in 2025?
Absolutely. Absolutely expect that. I think last year, it really worked out well. The first game against Maryland, they were kind of doing like, let's split up the reps evenly, right? And it didn't really work. I mean, granted, you're also playing, it's your first game of the year. You're in a new scheme under a new OC. You're playing a Big Ten team on the road. Right? There's a lot of other factors in there. But, after that, they kind of just went with, Cam Edwards is running back 1, and we'll find some other ways to get guys involved, and they'll go with the hot hand. And I think that really ended up working out pretty well. I mean, Edwards over 800 yards, Robinson over 800 yards. I think Brown was over 600, if I'm remembering right, at least in the 5s. So I can't imagine that they shy away from that again. I think MJ Flowers is interesting. I saw him do a lot in the passing game in the spring in practice, which I've thought for a while has been a little bit of an area where UConn could add more, especially when you have so many talented backs like that. So I think by body wise, style wise, he kind of replaces Darrell Robinson, right? They're both pretty big backs, 6 foot, 6'1", 220, just a big, he can be a bruising back if he needs to be. He can be an athletic back if he needs to be, a speedster. So very versatile. Had 800 plus yards in each of his first 2 seasons at Eastern Illinois as a freshman and sophomore. So I think he's going to do pretty well. And then what you have already in Edwards, Brown, and Rosa. So really looking at 4 backs. And I mean, I know that offensive coordinator / offensive line coach Gordon Samus is stoked about that because I don't think he can have enough running backs, especially after the 2023 season where a couple of them left, a couple of them got injured, and Cam Edwards was a converted defensive back playing running back for the first time in that season, ended up being the team's leading rusher. So, definitely a diamond in the rough there. But 4 backs, and like I said, they're run first, they're run heavy, and they're going to use them all.
You described the playing style of MJ Flowers. For those not familiar with Cam Edwards, Mel Brown, or Victor Rosa, can you kind of describe for those listeners maybe what they do best or what their skill sets are best at?
Yeah, I think Edwards is more of like an every down back. At first glance, he may look like a third down back because he's big and he's strong, but he's really quick. And I think he does a fantastic job of letting things develop and seeing where his holes open up and then hit them, the way that he needs to. Same with Brown. Brown's a little smaller, a little shiftier. But once he gets out in the open field, I mean, it's tough. I think, if you rewatch the bowl game last year, I think he was the first play from scrimmage for UConn, and he was just, gone down the sideline, right? Once you let him get to that second level, you're in trouble. And Rosa's kind of the same way, definitely more of like a bruising style. Like he hits the hole hard. If he's able to pop out, he's out in the second level, same deal. He's gone. I wouldn't say they necessarily have like a third down only back or, a goal line type. It's usually Edwards in those situations just because he's kind of the biggest and the strongest, but he's also like your every down back too. So you really have 4 guys who could be your every down back if you want to. And I think that's what they're looking for because, these days anything can happen with injuries, with, heaven forbid somebody enters the portal before the season's over again. These things can all happen. And, they don't want someone to just be, typecast into one role. They want versatile guys. And I think that's what they have.
I realize it's early June, but if you had to guess who gets that first running back carry week 1 against Central Connecticut, who would that be?
Cam Edwards, I think. I mean, he's the guy. He doesn't get talked about a lot, which is interesting because, he's local. He's from Connecticut as well. He's just a little more laid back and he's quiet, but he's also a leader on the team, and he's talented. He's been the leading rusher the past couple of years. I mean, he led the team in 23 too, and he only played in 8 games, maybe something like that. So he's the guy. He's the workhorse, and he's the running back one. So I think it's going to be him.
Let's move over to the wide receivers. The Huskies see 4 wideouts graduate and 4 more transfer. They will look to fill TJ Sheffield and Josiah Gathing's production from 2024. That duo combined for 86 receptions, 138 targets for 810 yards and 6 touchdowns. But this room is highlighted by the return of Skylar Bell, who led the team in targets with 94, yards with 860, and touchdowns with 5, second on the team in receptions with 50. This room lacks experience, though, as Shamar Porter's 6 receptions are the next highest guy after Skylar Bell. The staff also brought in 3 transfers before the spring, and then 2 more after the spring. What are the expectations for the wide receivers as we head into fall camp?
Yeah. Expectations are to come in and at least replicate last year. You have Skylar Bell, who was obviously a great addition. And, if people follow along, entered the portal, looked around, was visiting Michigan. I was never worried, but there was a lot of worry out there. I just, my gut from doing this for so long, I'm like, he's back. I just know he's back. He's your first guy. And Shamar Porter, I'm huge on. A lot of people are huge on. Was a redshirt freshman last year. 4-star recruit out of Tennessee in high school, went to Kentucky for a season, transferred up here, just wants to play, right? Just one of those guys is like, I don't care about anything else. Like, I just want to play football. I want to be out there. And I think he's going to be one of your guys. And after that, like you mentioned, you have a lot of inexperience, but I think kind of inexperience playing at Connecticut. A lot of the transfers have been around for a while, and you still have guys on the team that they still like and talk about, like Jackson Harper. These are players that, it has been kind of the prototypical UConn recruiting strategy, which has been, bring in some guys who need to develop, who need to either hit the weight room, learn the playbooks, do all that. In the meantime, you go to the portal, you grab some guys to put out there in the interim. But eventually these high school guys also need to develop and get out in the field, right? So it wouldn't shock me too if you see that as well.
As I mentioned, there's 138 targets up for grabs here in 2025. How do you see that starting lineup shaking out? Obviously, Skylar Bell's already locked in, but who do you think maybe the other 2 receivers that join him out there?
Yeah, I think you get Shamar Porter out there as well. I like having, and this is strictly Graham talking here, right. I like having some of the bigger targets. So, like I'm interested in seeing Chris Parker, a Central Michigan transfer. I think he's like 6'3", 200, just having that bigger target. But Raymello Murphy, the Arizona transfer, I thought stood out this spring, made some really nice catches. So I could certainly see, a starting receiving lineup of Porter, Bell, and then Murphy out there. But also, they're going to rotate people in. It's just, like Josiah Gathings didn't really, beginning of the year, he was getting a catch here and there, and then really came on in the second half of the year. And I think you're going to see that again this year. Like Bell's going to be your guy, right? When all else fails, Skylar's down there somewhere, just chuck it up, see if you can find him. And you always need a player like that. But I think this is going to be a room that, as chemistry builds between them and Joe Fagnano and just being more comfortable, I think it's going to be a room that really takes off towards the end of the year. And thankfully, they have a strong running game to offset that at the beginning.
Skylar Bell had an amazing season last year. Do you think, year two, another year with Joe and developing that connection, that he can even, improve upon what he's able to do in 2025 and or in 2024 and have a bigger season here in 2025?
I certainly hope so. I mean, for all the positives with Skylar, he also was one of, had some of the most drops in the country for any receiver as well. So there's still room for improvement. Obviously, nobody is going to be coming out here and being perfect. Fix some of the drops. Now we're talking even more productivity. So yeah, I think absolutely he has a chance, to be that first 1,000-yard receiver, which since Noel Thomas Jr. in 2015, 2016, one of those. But it's been a minute. It's just like I mentioned at the outset, they don't throw the ball a lot. And they also don't have the type of because they don't throw the ball a lot, usually don't get those kinds of receivers that can get 1,000-yard seasons. So it's kind of a catch-22, right? But I think he certainly is in for a big season, and I also really think that Shamar Porter is gonna break out, and he could be the Skylar Bell of last year. Someone that comes in, you don't really know a lot about him, and all of a sudden is bam, very productive. I could definitely see it.
If you were to describe how the tight ends are utilized in this offense to someone that's never caught a Huskies game, how would you describe it?
Ooh, they're big. They're big boys, and they block. But I will say, of the two main tight ends that they utilize, Alex Honig and Louis Hansen. Hansen is more of a pass catcher, and he again came on at the end of last year as well. He became more of a target in the passing game. I expect that to continue. They brought in Juice Vereen from NC State. And he's more of kind of, if you remember from a couple of years ago, Justin Jolie, who's also now at NC State. So I guess he got a little bit of a trade going on with the Wolfpack. Kind of more like a wide receiver, like a bigger wide receiver body, kind of that hybrid receiver tight end role. So they should be plugging him in there. And then you still got Hansen and Honig out there. And to block and, big end zone presence, especially for Hansen. So for the most part, they're out there blocking, but everyone's out there blocking because they run the ball most of the time anyways. And then they'll surprise you with, a nice little play action, and all of a sudden Hansen or Honig's wide open somewhere downfield. That's how they use their tight ends, but I think they want to get more of that hybrid role going again that they lost with Jolie.
Yeah, Juice Vereen was someone I was really excited about at NC State, and then it never really seemed to pan out there. But I remember when he came in as a freshman, they were really, really excited for him, and so I'm really excited to kind of see what he can do there at UConn. And how did he look in the spring? Did he look electric? Did he look? Did he show some of those things maybe he showed as a freshman at NC State?
Yeah, I mean, I thought he looked pretty comfortable out there. I'm always a little hesitant to talk about spring, like how people look, only because everyone looks good. It's such a controlled environment. Like you should look good. If you look bad, then we have we have ourselves a serious problem. But you can see why they're excited about him. And you can see the athleticism and the size. And that's just a combination that obviously you can't teach. They always say you can't teach speed, can't teach size, and he's got it. So it's going to be big to see what he can do this summer in workouts, in the weight room, in the, now is the time where you're throwing with Joe on the side. You guys got to do it yourselves because obviously it's not a coaching period right now. So, what happens between now and August, I think is going to be the key for Vereen and the rest of the passing game too, frankly.
Do you think they intend to kind of use him as a weapon like Justin Jolie was when he was there?
I think that's the idea. Whether it's the exact same role,
sure.
I don't. And they're not going to tell me that.
Right,
they're not going to give away any secrets, but
yeah,
I would imagine that that's how it's going to go. It's just you have somebody like him. There's no use in sticking him to just block, right? Like you got to find a way to get him involved. And I think that's what OC Samus is really good at. He's fine. He always finds ways to kind of meet guys where they are, get them involved somehow, whether it's in a traditional way or a non-traditional way. But he knows how to find players and get them into spaces where they can succeed. And I have no doubt he'll do the same thing with Juice.
Well, moving over to the offensive line, similar to 2024, the Huskies will be looking to replace 3 starters. Left tackle, guard, and right tackle have all graduated. Due to some injuries, though, there were some guys who got some meaningful playing time in 2024. The staff also brought in 3 guys in the portal. Even though there are holes to fill on this line, the experience coming back should make Husky fans feel pretty good. But I'm curious, how do you feel about this offensive line heading into the season?
I should be worried because you're replacing so much, but I'm not. And it's been the offensive line, which again, another thing, other teams I'm sure would trade places with UConn in a millisecond. They've just had such good continuity and such great development. It's a team like UConn is not going to go out and get, a P4 starting offensive lineman in the portal. This is simply not going to happen. So they grow their own, and somehow they're able to keep them. Like Christian Haynes could have transferred. He stayed, came back for another year. Chase Lunt, who got picked up by the Bills this spring in the draft, could have transferred, stayed. So somehow they're able to not only get these guys out of high school or out of prep school, develop them into starters, and then keep them as well. So, coming back this season, you have, like you mentioned, there's a lot of meaningful snaps that took place, thankfully. You lose Ben Morawski to injury. He'll be back for the summer. He was kind of in and out in the spring in some drills, which I'm totally fine with. Don't rush anything. You get him coming back. You get Wes Hoey coming back. Syracuse transfer. He should be at center. And you have a lot of guys who played a lot of snaps. Karsten Cassidy, I think, is going to be a guy they're going to find somewhere for him, either whether it's on the interior or at tackle. Like they like him, and he's been productive and solid. They'll find a space for him. Kyle Juergens, same thing. Probably more of an interior guy than an exterior on the outside, but he's going to get in there. They added a couple transfers. You had a Ty Chan, to tackle from Notre Dame. I think he probably takes one of the sides, either left or right. They added Tamaris Walker from Maryland, more of a guard, although I guess did play a little bit of tackle for the Terrapins. So I think he gets in there somewhere. They still return Tank Green, who didn't really get in there too much last year, but a big transfer from Maryland as well. I think he gets into the mix. I mentioned Cassidy. You have Jaden Bass, who's transferred from Syracuse, a bit of a younger guy. I think he's kind of one, if he's not playing this season, I would expect to see him, the next few for his, his college career. I think he's going to be kind of one of the guys that will be kind of like a Chase Lunt. Like he plays a little bit here and there, and then, sophomore year, junior year, he's going to take the reins and he's going to go. You also have Danny Antelovich, who's been there. I think, don't hold me to this, I want to say he's the last Randy Edsall guy that's on the roster, right? So it's almost completely 100% flipped from the Edsall 2.0 years. Never really got in there too much, but he's a big guy, size. I mean, has certainly learned and is a veteran. So it wouldn't shock me to see him get some reps out there too. It's just tough when you're a tackle and, and you've had Chase Lunt and Valentin Sen there for years, and you're just not, it's tough to, to move past those guys. So now that there's opportunities abound.
It sounds like there's a lot of, UConn Husky fans can take some comfort in the fact that there's a lot of capable bodies there.
Yes, for sure.
Who would you say is the leader of this offensive line?
Ooh, no, it's tough. They've had some really strong leaders. You had Christian Haynes for a while. You had Valentin Sen. You had Chase Lunt. I would look at some of the guys like either a Kyle Juergens, a Cassidy, some of these younger guys, but they learned from guys like Haynes and Lunt and Sen. even Antelovich you could throw in there too. I think these are going to be the guys that, they understand the culture and they understand what's needed, right, to be a successful offensive line. Because they watched it forever. And something about Christian Haynes and Chase Lunt is they were such great leaders and such great guys. I think they really made it a point to make sure they passed this on to the next group of guys. So I would look at anyone who's been around for a couple years and was able to learn from these guys. But if I had to pick just one, it could be Antelovich. He could be the guy. But I think it remains to be seen at the moment if there's just one leader.
All right, Graham, if you had to pick an offensive player to have a breakout type season in 2025, who would that be?
I gotta go with Shamar Porter. I keep talking about him, but can you tell I like him? Can you tell I'm a fan? I think he's really going to do well. And, when he was in there last year, he made just highlight reel catches, one-handed catches, up against someone's back, and it just looked easy for him. And I think being out there, being like an all-around receiver, right? Instead of just being like, hey, Porter's in there we're chucking a deep package. I think he's really going to do well. And he's a physical specimen. I think his father's like a or still like pro bodybuilder, power lifter kind of thing. So, he certainly has the size and the strength and the athleticism. And I think they're just going to find a way to get him the ball and see what he could do. So I look to Shamar Porter.
Well, let's move over to the defensive side of the ball. For those not familiar with the Huskies' defensive scheme, how would you describe it? They throw a variety of fronts at you. I guess in a technical sense, they're a 3-3-5, but sometimes they're a 4-2-5. Sometimes they'll have, you may have, 4 down linemen. You're going to have 3 down linemen. You got those hybrid linebackers and, edge guys that you don't really know where they're going to be, but they disguise a lot of their coverages. And that's what they do. And again, being a G5 team, you're not going to, again, like I said, with the offensive line, it's tough to get, a big lockdown corner in the portal, but they've also been able to develop their own guys and find some real diamonds in the rough in the portal. And Jim Mora hates this terminology, absolutely hates it. And he's going to be mad that I said it. He does not like bend but don't break defenses. And it's kind of what they were up until last year. And last year was really one of the first years I remember in a while where I was like, this is a defense that's getting straight up stops. They're not hoping to get a field goal. Maybe you miss the field goal or, get down to the 40 and they need to kind of try to down it in the goal line kind of thing because they're just out of field goal range. This was a defense that got stops straight up. Unfortunately, this defense also loses the majority of the guys who were there last year. So there's a lot of competition going on, and there's going to be a lot of questions to be answered this summer. Well, overall, this defense loses a lot of production from 2024. But let's get started by looking at the guys up front along the defensive line. By the way of graduation or the portal, this room loses 7 guys. They'll be anchored by edge Donovan Branch. But this room will be looking to replace 113 pressures in the 15 sacks they lost. Probably the 2 biggest losses were Langston Hardy, who's off to Wake Forest, and then Price Yates off to North Carolina. That duo combined for 49 pressures and 9 sacks off the edge in 2024. It does, it looks like their staff did the UConn staff did a good job in trying to replace this line in 2025. What should our expectations be as we head into the season?
What should the expectation be? I'm sure they're going to say the expectations don't change from last year, but I think also you got to look at it realistically and know that that's probably not really a possibility. I mean, look, it was absolutely a point of focus for the portal period. I mean, it's just one of those things that's like you kind of knew it was always coming. Like you would look at the kind of like the breakdowns and the depth charts and like, oh, well, they're all graduates. They're all graduates. They're all seniors, right? Like it's like this year was always coming. So I think, one of the big ones that they're really excited about adding was Ben Smiley from Virginia. Same also Vincent Carroll Jackson, Nebraska. These are two guys I think that are going to step in right away. You return Curvin Shoot from UCF, who was able to get some pretty meaningful minutes last year as well. I see him working his way in there. Again, like I said, it's never like there's four down linemen, there's three down linemen. Like they're always disguising some stuff. But I think you mentioned Donovan Branch for sure. I mean, in terms of the edge position, like this is his, it's his position now, but you also add in Antonio Harris. Aaron Key returns as well, who had some pretty meaningful time as well last year. I mean, there's so many. I mean, Stephen Wright from a bunch of schools, right? SMU, Arizona State, Texas Southern, I think. You have Trent Jones. They add Antonio Harris from New Mexico, not New Mexico State. I was about to say New Mexico State, not the Aggies. So
Utah State
of
Aggies.
new faces.
Who will this team lean on to kind of create the pressure on the opposing quarterbacks in 2025? Who do you think's the guy that's, I don't know. I mean, I'm assuming there's probably not a Price Yates on this defense, but who do you think that is going to be the guy in terms of wrecking havoc on the quarterbacks?
Well, they're going to need someone to be a Price Yates, right? And as for who that is, I think they're hoping it's someone like a Ben Smiley, but I would certainly look at Donovan Branch as well. Again, just another one of those guys that just he gets stuck behind Langston Hardy, who hadn't played his first few years for injuries and all of a sudden broke out this year, right? So it's tough to supplant somebody like that. So I think this is really his opportunity. The D line proper, was really more of like a run stop line. You mentioned Price Yates, and absolutely he would get in there and get after the quarterback. But the guys like Dalmon Cordine, Jelani Stafford, they're really more big bodies that kind of clog things up. So I think they have a good mix of that again this year. Again, the problem is, guys like Stafford and Cordine had been there for several years and were entrenched leaders on this unit. And now you're trying to plug and play some new guys and hope you get something similar. I think the best case scenario for this group is that they're pretty good to start the season. They're good enough, and then they continue to get better as the season goes on. I think that's your best case.
Well, while the line saw several guys depart, I feel like the linebacker room might be more of a concern as we saw their top two linebackers graduate, and Jaden McDonald and Tui Faminu were the top two tacklers in 2024, 91 and 69 respectively. They also had 5 sacks apiece. What has the staff done to address those losses?
Go out and grab a bunch of transfers. Linebacker was a big concern last year too, because you had Jackson Mitchell leaving.
Yeah.
One of the all-time best tacklers at UConn, and Famina Brown really, he played a lot in 2023, but he struggled in his first big, real season of meaningful snaps. So there was definitely a concern. Adding Jaden McDonald was fantastic. I knew he was going to be an incredible addition. One of the best tacklers in the Sun Belt for Troy. I mean, I'm a big production guy over potential. So, he had it, and he certainly showed why he did that. Why he was the way he was in the Sun Belt. Did it all with one good shoulder. He had a torn labrum for pretty much the entire season, and did all that, which is incredible. But I think you look at someone like Tyquan King, who's actually a local guy from Connecticut, very, very productive tackler at Temple. Really everywhere he's gone. North Carolina A&T, he was one of their top tacklers as a freshman. He goes to Temple, same deal. Actually, he had about 15. I think he had 15 tackles when Temple played at UConn here last year. So someone, and I know he's very excited to be home for his last season of college and be able to play in front of his family and his friends and all that. Brian Parham's another one who highly productive tackler at San Jose State, decided to try to go to Washington and didn't work out in Washington. But their loss, those Huskies' loss is our Huskies' gain. And you still have guys. You've got Aaron Key. You've got Amir Renwick, who I've always been a big fan of because he's a hard hitter. I love dudes that just like to hit, and that's him. But like I was mentioning with kind of receivers too, like they've been recruiting high school linebackers, right, over the years. So now it's time. Some of these guys need to start developing into starters, and I think if I had to pick one of them, it'd be Omar Diamande. A New York guy who was relatively lightly recruited, like a lot of New York City players. He really impresses me. And I think, if something were to happen, I'm knock on wood, injuries, I think he's someone that you can plug in there and do pretty well. But like you mentioned, there's a lot of, it's a big loss of production. I say front seven in a more traditional sense, but they lost really the whole front seven. So it's huge to build that back up. And I hope for the best case scenario, which is, they're good enough to start the season and then just get better and better as the season goes on. I think that's really what UConn fans can really hope for. I don't think you're going to come out, week 2 against Syracuse, and I don't think you're going to see, the same defense you saw at the end of last year, unfortunately.
As you mentioned earlier, UConn's had at least a recent history of great linebackers. You go Jackson Mitchell, you look at the season Jaden McDonald had a year ago. Is there a guy you think can, be that next star guy here in 2025 at linebacker for the Huskies?
It's probably Taekwon King, just based off his prior production. I mean, very similar profile to Jaden McDonald. And I think he'll also be a little more motivated to, play well in front of his hometown, all of his family and friends. So I looked at Taekwon King as, the main linebacker in this group. He's kind of your linebacker one, if you want to call it that. It's always tough in this defense because obviously everything's floating around. But I think you're really going to look at Parham, you're going to look at King, and those are going to be your two guys.
Well, moving over to the defensive secondary, they'll have some holes to fill as cornerback Jordan Wright and safeties Malik Dixon-Williams and Durant Jones have graduated. Cornerback Malcolm Bell will also need to be replaced as he is off to Michigan State. This room will look to lean on the experience of safety Damon Brinson and cornerback Cam Chadwick in 2025. This room is thin, so the staff added 7 guys in the portal. What should we expect from the secondary heading into 2025?
Yeah, I would expect Brinson and Chadwick to be the 2 corners again this season. Couple homegrown, not hometown guys, but grown, developed, got out of high school, committed to UConn, and have developed within the program. The safeties is tough. I mean, it's been Malik Dixon-Williams and Durante Jones for a long time. It's like similar to the defensive lines. Like you knew someday this was coming and they're going to be gone. The good thing for UConn is that Durante Jones is actually on staff now as a defensive analyst and recruiting staff. So he's sticking around, which is cool. And Dixon-Williams, I believe, is going to mini camp with one of the LA teams. I can't remember which one. I want to say Chargers, but I could be wrong. But so I think safety is really where you're looking for help. And I think that, they like Devin Pringle a lot, a D2 transfer from Grand Valley State, one of the best D2 programs that there is in recent years. He was actually recruited a couple years ago, opted to go back to Grand Valley State. So once he was back in the portal, we need this guy. Went out and got him. I mean, I think you see Tyrese Mills in there a little bit. I think you see Latu and Albert, the Wisconsin, Mississippi State transfers. I think those are, Latu, I think, is more of like a this year guy, and Albert is probably someone, he has a few years of eligibility left, so I think he's someone you see later on. But I think in the immediate term, you're going to see Latu, Pringle, Tyrese Mills, Penn State transfer to fill out the safeties. And as for corner, I saw a lot of Kaluba Peewee Jr. from Georgetown. He was there a lot in the spring. I think there's again another guy who's probably only here for a year, but he's going to be someone that they really lean on as well. And as you mentioned, they added some guys afterwards too. DeAndre Glover. They added DeAndre Harris. Getting all my names mixed up here. So they're always adding guys, and you still have your players. Lee Millett III is someone I've always been high on as well. I could see him at safeties. He's been in and out at the safety position. If Ronte Jones was out for targeting, which happened a few times, which some more warranted than others, you would see Millett out there, and I think he's a really sound tackler, and so he's another guy that I see is going to be out there.
Well, let's say this secondary is lights out here in 2025. Who or which player do you think is the reason why they're successful?
It's either going to be Brinson or Chadwick. And I lean more towards Brinson. Brinson, you look at him, he's a little short on the shorter side. I think listed at 5'9". But he's strong and he's athletic and he's a really, they're like lockdown corner. And so I think he really sets the tone for this defense. He can really take a passing threat away from the opponent. And then, Cam Chadwick was just a freshman last year, and he jumps in and plays well. Certainly got burned. You always do as a DB. You can't ever expect not to. But just someone who just always bounced back. So I look at Brinson. I think he really sets the tone. If he's locking dudes down, if he's playing well, I think that provides a lot of confidence to the rest of the group. But that's always a big ask.
All right, Graham, just like the offensive side, if you had to pick a defensive player to have a breakout type season in 2025, who would that be?
I hope it's Taekwon King. I hope he replicates a Jaden McDonald type season. You need that guy, right? That's just all over the place, swarms to the ball. I think that's King. He's my breakout guy. If it's not him, then I hope it's the other linebacker, Brian Parham. But one of those guys, somebody at linebacker is going to have to be your breakout guy.
Well, we've talked offense, we've talked some defense. Now let's move over to special teams. How do those units look, and are there any concerns?
Hey, you know what? No concerns. Kicker is back, Chris Freeman. He's another one that, similar to Joe Fagnano, we didn't know there was eligibility left. Got another season. It's a great, missed his first 3 kicks at UConn and was kind of in the doghouse with a lot of fans, but those were all 50-plus yard field goals. It's not really fair to start getting a guy in rhythm, once he started getting some of those shorter kicks, he was golden from the rest of the season, right? So I expect more of the same. No issues with Chris Freeman. Connor Stutz returns at punter. Not the biggest leg, but, can place the ball, which is good. And then, at the return positions, you've got, you lose TJ Sheffield, who was one of their main punt returners. But I think there's going to be a lot of guys that they can plug in. Someone I think may get plugged in is Terrence Smith Jr., who I believe they have listed at running back at the moment. He's kind of gone back and forth between running back and receiver, just a speedster. And I can see him just getting involved in the return game, maybe some trick plays kind of things on offense, but he's someone that I think you have to, you got to utilize his speed. So I see him at the return game. But overall, I mean, it's nice not to have to worry about special teams, especially with so many other position groups that need to get rebuilt.
Now that spring practice is over, which position group or groups do you think is the most concerning heading into 2025?
Either linebacker or D line, and only because there's no continuity. That's tough. I mean, you're getting players from all over, all new players, and UConn has been pretty good with the portal, right? I mean, even if someone didn't necessarily pan out from a football sense, they've always been, solid teammates and, good parts of the culture. So I'm sure that part's continuing. Now it's just, you've got 4 new D linemen starting, 3, whatever he's putting out there. How do they play together? It's a big question. We're not playing college football on Xbox or something. We can't just plug and play dudes. Like, there's a lot more that goes into it. So I really hope that they are fine, but I think it's certainly a concern. Even if individually they're all talented, what's this group going to look like? And that's a big question that we won't know until August 30th.
In today's age of NIL, revenue sharing, and the transfer portal, how have you seen it change UConn's recruiting philosophy?
I mean, I think for UConn, the strategy's shifted a little bit. It shifted from needing to go get guys in the portal like Skylar Bells and Nick Evers. Now the budget, I think, is allotted more towards retention of guys. Right, so keeping Skylar Bell, keeping Mel Brown and Cam Edwards, and look, the reality is that UConn is obviously independent. If and when this revenue share ends up actually happening, I believe at the time of this recording, there's no movement on that, even though it's supposed to be July 1. I thought, they don't have the revenue that a lot of other teams have. They have a football media deal with CBS Sports Network that's really just the benefit is that UConn gets to be on linear TV. It's not really like a financial windfall for them at all, right? So it's going to be about being really smart with your money. It's about trying to find diamonds in the rough, trying to find guys like Devin Pringles, playing at D2 powerhouses and like this guy is probably good enough to be playing a group of 5 schedule. You got to try to find guys like him. And as an overall philosophy, UConn needs to do what they did last year many times over and ideally beat a team like Wake Forest going forward. Because they, as far as I know, have no interest in joining a group of 5 conference. It's power or bust for them. So, and it's tough. You can't really play your way into a conference. If they could, they probably would have been in the ACC after they went to the Fiesta Bowl. That's not what happened. But you can certainly play your way out. And so I think they're trying to avoid playing themselves out and just continuing to win games and go to bowl games and show like we can be a consistent winner here at Connecticut, but that takes money and it takes resources. And I think the athletic department and the state are committed to doing that. But again, it's a tough ask. It's a big ask, and they don't have money to just throw around willy-nilly. So
what do you think the main strength of this 2025 team is?
It's probably going to be its run game. I think the run game is going to be what sets the tone for everything. It's going to set the tone for the passing game. It's going to set the tone if they can, get some real, time-consuming drives running the ball. It's going to help the defense out, right? Because if you're just throwing this brand new defense out there, 3 and outs and just putting them back on the field, it's not going to help them at all. So I think that this team will go the way the running game goes. And last year they were almost completely evenly matched rushing yards and passing yards. So I think you see that similarly again. But as long as Cam Edwards is moving, the run game's going, Joe Fagnano's out there, they're going to give themselves a chance. But it's still not an offense that's going to go out and put up 50 points a game. It's just not that type of offense. So nice ground and pound, turn some clock. It's not going to be the prettiest at times. But they can do that, keep the defense off the field. It should be all right.
What does success look like for UConn in 2025?
Certainly another winning season, another bowl game, another bowl win, ideally. A lot of people are very bullish on this team. A lot of fans are like, oh, they could win 10 games. I've been around for a long time, right? I remember the earliest I remember going is 98. So I've been around for this team. I never get too high, never get too low because these bad things happen. That happens. I think looking at the schedule, it's not a murderer's row, right? You've got certainly winnable games. You got 3 power games, BC, Syracuse, Duke. Those aren't, they're not Ohio State. They're not Tennessee. It's not impossible, but it's also not easy. And then the rest of the schedule is all, G5 and teams that they've beaten before. You got Rice again. You've got Florida Atlantic again. You've got Buffalo, although I certainly don't think Buffalo will be a slouch this season. It won't be easy. But they can do 8 wins again. I think Vegas had them at 7.5, and this was the first time in a while where I was like, I wouldn't feel comfortable either way on that, because it's just, I think that's probably the sweet spot. I think it's 7 or 8. But I think a really successful season would be more than that. Would be like 9. It would be knocking off one of the ACC teams. I think fans would really feel pretty good if they could do that. They can go on the road and beat BC. They can go beat Syracuse. It'll be Syracuse week 2 with a lot of new guys. Problem is UConn has a lot of new guys too. So who knows? But I would certainly rather have Syracuse in this position than I would last season with them getting hot down the stretch.
Well, Graham, we've covered a lot of ground today, but is there anything else you want to share or think that we should know about this 2025 UConn Huskies football team?
Yeah, just know that, it's a serious operation in stores. Obviously, it's a basketball school. Everyone knows UConn for their basketball, but they are trying their darndest to, have football be pretty good too. I don't think there's any expectation that they'll be a national champion or anything in football, but they want to have good football as well. They want to get into a power conference, and this 2025 is just another piece of that strategy. So hoping for big things.
Well, Graham, thank you for taking some time out of your day to spend with us and share your knowledge. We greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Always a pleasure. You guys do great work. All your previews, all the work you guys do for Group of 5 and teams that don't get a ton of coverage. So thank you so much for doing that. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for the kind words. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. If you're listening in podcast form, please rate and review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Thank you all for your support. And until the next time, we are the G5 Hive.